Okay. So, hello. I am really excited about today's podcast. Um, I'm Constance Harris, and welcome to the Roost News, the place for all things volunteer. Um, I'm here as a volunteer with the AARP Roost News, and I'm welcoming to our podcast today Mary Angela Baker and Jack Baker, who are the founders of the Maryland State Book Club, the State of Maryland Book Club. Sounds better, I think. So, welcome to the two of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad. I love to read. I love to read. And so I was excited to learn that there's actually a book club dedicated for books by authors and historically about events in our great state of Maryland. So I am just going to ask you, tell us a little bit about the two of you, how you came to be volunteers, and how you even thought about starting this great book club.
Okay, so I have been with the AARP Maryland volunteer for about 6 years. I was on the executive council, and during COVID is when we started to do the book discussion. So I'm a transplant from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So coming here to Maryland has been just a wonderful opportunity to learn about a new community, to learn about a new area, the history, get more in depth with the history. So just glad to be part of this.
Well, I came along, Constance, because why did I come along with a lot of things that my wife does, just because most of the things she does are pretty cool and pretty interesting. And I've just learned to tag along when she asks me to. I'm being a little facetious. My interest goes beyond just the surface of it. My background is in teaching American literature. My specialty was the Southern American novel and writing. And when I retired, Mary Angela had started germinating this idea, and it seemed like a good fit that I would kind of tag along. It also has helped me keep in touch. I'm interested always have been interested and remain interested in what America reads, why they're reading, what they're interested in. In the middle part of the last century, one of the most interesting observers and critics of American literature, a guy named Leslie Fiedler, announced in the middle part of the last century that the novel was dead. And what he was talking about was the notion that in an age of shortened attention spans, increased media, social media coming, and so on and so forth, that America wasn't going to read book length, much in the way of book length literature anymore. At the time that he announced that, I thought he was misguided. And the interesting thing to me is that it's proven to be misguided, that America is still reading. They're still reading book length work. They're still reading. Now, you can have arguments about whether what's happened to the quality of what they're reading, and that's an argument that you can debate. But America is still, in fact, reading book length fiction and nonfiction. And I find that interesting. And so participating in this and kind of helping structure this has satisfied my interest in that subject. Why we're reading what we're reading and who's reading too. So
I really appreciate that, delving just a little bit deeper into that whole subject of reading and why we read, and sharing with us that in fact we are still reading, because you saw the expression on my face when you said that he commented that we were going to stop reading. Now I'm like, what do you mean stop reading? I can't imagine that. And I'm so old school, Jack, that I know, about Kindles and a lot of people like to read stuff online, but I have a library card. I was in the library yesterday, And
Bless
I
your heart.
still
Yeah.
I take out books from the library. I like books.
Yeah.
I
You
like
like the
books.
way, I'm guessing, Constance, that you like the way they feel in your hand, and
Yes.
and you like sitting down with it, maybe with a cup of tea or something, in that experience. And bless your heart for being in the library, and getting your books from the library. I do have a fear that they may, well, libraries are finding a new way to interact
Mhm.
and work with their participants, and hopefully that will continue. But yes, I'm very interested in why America keeps reading. One of the demographic parts of this that interests me is, you're obviously much younger than I am, but I do wonder if there isn't a generational change going on, and as the millennials come along, and maybe some of the Gen Xers who, are my children in that age group, I wonder if they aren't if their habits aren't changing, if they are using libraries in the same way that we did, and if they're reading in the same way that we did. That remains to be seen. But for a lot of us, the pleasure of being involved in a book, is still very, very important. And we can talk, if you'd like, about some of the reasons for that. But I'm glad to hear that at least you're out there reading. So,
Definitely. So that brings us to why we have gathered here on this podcast. Do tell us, Mary Angela, more specifically about the book club, kind of focused around Maryland, and how you even arrived at that, for lack of a better word, parameter. I don't know if that's the correct term or not.
Right. So we were in the middle of COVID. Everyone was hunkered down. We were talking about, sheltering in place, not being out. And the work I've done with AARP was started with Life Reimagined. And Richard Leiter was one of the founders of that, wrote the book Life Reimagined. And he had a phrase, which I just think was so powerful pre-COVID, which is isolation is fatal. And in the last few years, we've really seen a lot of research that's come out to saying about how isolation impacts our lifespan. And so out here on the shore, we were saying, how can we connect with people? I mean, Zoom has become this wonderful tool that's easy to access. And so how can we connect with people in a safe way? And that's one of the ways that we started was with this book discussion. And so in creating the book discussion, I did my research first, talk to people. Do you think this would be interesting? Do you think people would show up? I always think it's important to do the market research beforehand. And, just kept getting this yes, yes, yes. And so the first year that we did this, we really focused on books that took place on the Eastern Shore, and telling the story of the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And with that, had started out with Misty of Chincoteague, which is this wonderful story of time and place, in the whole idea of this farmer who has this horse that they adopt through the pony auction. And so started out with that. We said, okay, we know it's a young adult book, but that's an easy way for folks to kind of get introduced to our book discussion. So we started that in September of 2021. And with that, then went forward with books that were good stories. And so when we thought about the criteria for the books we chose, we basically had two criteria. One was that it told a good story, and it could be something that you could discuss. And then the second was that it was easily available either through purchase or actually the library. So we really wanted to make sure that any book we chose was one that people could find and be accessible to them.
That makes sense, because as you said, you began this during COVID. So I agree. You didn't want it to be a book that had just been published and you couldn't find it, or I understand. Well, one of the ones from the list that you shared that intrigues me is The Woman Who Was a Spy.
I know, Virginia Hall.
Oh my gosh.
So Woman of No Importance. It was written by, here I want to make sure I get the name right, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II, Sonia Purnell. And Virginia Hall was a woman who very, very much wanted to be part of the Foreign Service and kept coming up with obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. Hurt her leg in a hunting accident and actually had her leg amputated. And after that was told, you will never ever serve because you're not, first of all, she was female, and that was a barrier against her. And then she had this disability. And she actually was then recruited by the British and went into France and was part of the resistance movement during World War II.
Wow.
So,
I actually am a retired Foreign Service officer, and I can't imagine having the chutzpah to be a spy on any level.
she was just an amazing woman. And just as you're reading this fictional account, which had so many details that, of how she motivated others and how she used just her network of people to help with the French resistance. Yeah.
Amazing.
We had a good friend back in Minneapolis, Constance, who was with the CIA and spent a lot of years in Indochina, but also spent several years in Eastern European hotspots and had an awful lot of stories to tell about, when they used to transfer information, walk across a bridge and drop something for another, and so on. So I found this, and Mary Angela comes up with these books and these stories um, more often than not involving strong women, ambitious women, smart women. So and it's always kind of enlightening and fun for me because too much of American literature is and which is my field, is revolves around a bunch of white men, and so it's so Mary Angela's constantly keeping me exposed to these stories about strong women, which is a lot of fun. So
I hear you. I hear you. And thank you, Jack, for verbalizing something that we all know, but we don't acknowledge it as much as we ought to. So thank you. I appreciate that. So Mary Angela, are there other, now that you've been doing this for a while, are there other members that help you do a little research to select the books that you choose, or are you still pretty much doing most of that by
Um,
yourself?
well,
I can answer that. I can answer that. My wife does pretty much all the research and the work, and I'm proud of the fact that she does it. So.
But I do connect with the folks at AARP Maryland, the staff there, and say, these are my choices. And then also putting out, again, using my network of getting book recommendations and asking people's feedback. There's a lot of stories that we've looked at, books we've looked at and said, this is really good, but will we attract, people who will come to the book discussion? So that's one of the things, again, what we keep in mind is, can we have a book that will sustain an hour-long conversation? But so I have a few people that I connect with that are volunteers also that will also come to the book discussion and help participate in that.
And thank you. I'm wondering, right now that we have not really, I mean, COVID's going to be with us, right?
Right.
But have you thought about, is it under consideration to do any in-person meetings, or are you going to keep it via Zoom? And is part of your rationale for that you have people plugging in from other states? Can you, as young people say, unpack that a little bit? The actual physical, not physical, what's the word I want? The actual
So the format is a face-to-face versus a
yes,
virtual format,
yes,
right?
thank you. Thank you.
So right now we have people who come from all across the United States. So when we start
Okay.
out each of the book discussions, we ask people to put in chat where they're from. So Arizona, Washington State, we've had people from Hawaii, all different time zones. And so we very deliberately choose the time to be at 4:00 Eastern time, which then makes it easy for people across the United States to join. So I think it's 4:00 here, was it 9 a.m. in Hawaii? So we
Mm.
way to make it an easier. We have not yet had conversations with AARP, but I think that there could be great potential of having some in-person discussion because so many of the authors we choose live in the Baltimore, Annapolis area. But
Ah.
so it could be what I call my yes and. So yes to keeping up with the Zoom conversations, and then there might be a way of building on that.
It's a good question, Constance, because, having taught this stuff for a lot of years in my career, and then participating in things like this, the conversations that you get in person are different. It changes the nature of the conversation. It changes what in the interaction. Um, Zoom, it's easier to hide behind Zoom, and in a face-to-face, it's not so easy to hide. So, there's a place, it seems to me, as Mary Angela says, in a yes and way for this to evolve, maybe. Yeah.
I like that. And I am thinking of other places when I'm wearing other hats, Mary Angela, that I can use that exact phrase. Thank you. You taught me something. Yes, and I
Uh,
like it. I
one of my
like that a lot.
Yeah, we use that a lot.
You hear
Now,
that a lot in our house.
oh, okay, okay. One of the other questions that comes to mind is when you did begin this, were there any particular obstacles? And if there were, did any of them really surprise you?
I think because my background is professional development and continuing education in higher education, then I always believe that one of the hardest thing is creating a program and then marketing it. And so I think when you think about obstacles is how do you get the word out? And being able to now market this nationally has really increased our exposure and increased the numbers. So I think of all the barriers, the marketing, of course, is something that we've learned to be better at and to be reaching a larger audience. I think, the conversations that we had beforehand of saying, okay, what books can we choose that will have a better discussion, and what are the areas of discussion that we could have? So, for example, we did, Charles Osgood wrote a book about growing up in Baltimore during World War II. And so the conversation is, not only what was happening with Charles Osgood in his day-to-day life as a 9-year-old boy, but then also what was going on in Baltimore. What was it like to be living in Baltimore and walking down the streets in the summer and hearing baseball games on the radio? And what was that? And when we had these conversations with people all across the country, that was, something that people could relate to, of saying, yes, I remember, or hearing stories about, listening to baseball. And one of the first stories I heard with Jack was, drinking Verner's ginger ale and listening to tell that you listened with your grandfather.
Well, if you believe, as I do, that most of our good books are really stories about time and place, then we try to be well, actually, what we try to do is use a model that I used in the last decade of my career. I designed and taught at the university a sequence in the American novel that was designed for older adults who wanted to come back for humanities-based classes, and it was wildly successful. And I was asked a lot of times why it works well, and I think it was because I tried to use the 3 R's, what I call the 3 R's. Try to be respectful of their life experience, tried to make the classic books, relevant to their experience, and make it rigorous, not make it fluff that they could just come and say. I wouldn't let them get away with just say, well, I liked it or I didn't like it. Well, can you be more specific? So, and we kind of try to do that with this book club. We don't get people get away with just saying it's good or bad. You're going to have to be a little more specific than that. So,
I like that. I'm actually writing it down, Jack. Respectful, and the
relevant
rigorous,
and
relevant, yeah,
rigorous.
relevant and rigorous. Um, it reminds me of my husband would never let our son give what he called, similar to what your point, a oh, that was nice compliment to someone.
Mhm.
My husband would say, you have to be specific. What are you complimenting them on for? What did you hear, or what behavior did they demonstrate that you are acknowledging? Be specific, and then people know that it's a sincere compliment. If you just go, it was nice, well, okay. what
Well,
does what
your
does that
husband,
mean?
well, your husband is obviously a smart man. I
He
have,
was.
I have fear of a culture in which, and I think we see this a lot of places where people just say, I like it or I don't like it. And that's it. And now there's not much depth of thought going into that. And to the extent that we lose depth of thought or critical thinking, well, we may be in more trouble than we realize.
Oh, I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that. Um, you've done such a good job with this. Any suggestions for other? No, even before I ask you that about other AARP volunteers that might want to duplicate this in some way. But even before I ask you that, you clearly have evolved because you mentioned all the other states that you're in.
Mhm.
Um, did that? Well, give us an idea of how that actually happened.
And that actually was the great AARP staff.
Oh,
Um,
good. Okay, that's good to know.
when I talked about marketing being the hardest part, thank goodness that they're taking care of that aspect. So it was folks at Eleanor and her team that helped get the word out and being able to post it nationally.
Perfect. That
Yeah.
makes sense. That makes sense.
So
And then it really does it intensify the feeling of all of us who are part of AARP really being part of something special. So since a lot of great marketing has been done, are you maybe you're already aware of other volunteers in different states that have picked up this same kind of idea?
but I know that New Jersey is interested. And so we're in the process of setting up a getting to know you conversation with the folks in New Jersey. Other states I have not heard. What I like about our book discussion is that we very much decided that these are the books that focus on Maryland. And so it is something that can be duplicated, that New Jersey folks focus on books that take place in New Jersey. And again, when you talk about time and place, the place of the state. So hopefully other states will be able to say, yes, I could easily see, because we're from the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, could easily see a book discussion in Minnesota that would, there's so many different books that you could spend years talking about from that area.
I like it. I like it. And Jack, I had not planned to ask this, but I do remember you saying that in your teaching literature that you began to focus on American books about the South.
Mhm.
How did you happen? Because are you originally from the South?
I, I grew up in Tennessee, in a small town in rural Tennessee. And I ended up in Minnesota, but I've always liked the rhythms of life in the South better than the northern part of the country. But more specifically to your question, Constance, Southern novels and Southern literature are much more interesting to me because they're Southern writers embrace allegory, metaphor, what I call just waves of language, beautiful language, in ways that other authors don't. I think there are some social and cultural reasons for that, which are kind of lengthy to talk about. But the other thing is that there is, in a post-Freudian world, there is still room for, this is going to sound odd, but there's still room for God, and there's still room for faith, and there's still room for mystery, and some of those things that I'm very drawn to in Southern literature that you don't find in what I think of as the New York Northern East Coast literary mafia. Those folks don't quite see those rhythms of the world in the same way that those of us who have a history in the South do. I hope that answers the question, but
It
that's,
does. It does. And it reminds me of a statement I heard just this past weekend at a conference. He was actually talking about business, but an Indian gentleman used the word cadence.
yeah,
And in
sure.
listening to you talk about the rhythm and the flow of Southern authors,
Yep.
what immediately came to my mind was cadence. And you're right, it's different. It really is different.
It is
Yeah.
different. You read any of the major from Southern novelists from Eudora Welty or Flannery O'Connor, William Faulkner, James Burke, or whoever, you will go along and all of a sudden you will realize that you've just read a paragraph that was one sentence. And and yet it absolutely helped mesmerized you throughout. One of the Southern writers' favorite words is and they will just say, and the sun came up, and we did this, and we did, all of a sudden you read a whole paragraph that's one sentence, and I love the way they're able to do that.
I like that. I like that. So, as we bring this podcast to a close, one of the things that I always like to just ask, and I try to be funny with it, it doesn't always work, but is there anything that you were bursting to tell us and I didn't ask it?
Bursting.
Yes.
I have nothing to that has you've covered everything. How about you, Jack?
Well, I think the only thing I'd be, as I've always said, one of my favorite American poets was Wallace Stevens, and a quote that I always remember from him was, it goes like this: "The reader became the book, and the summer night was like the being of the book." And it's a wonderful thought if you think about it for a second for this reason. And I'd encourage you listeners to think about this when you think about reading. The important thing about reading is that it leaves something for your imagination to do. And it's why reading is more important than other forms of media, in my judgment. So,
Wow. Thank you so much. Let me just pose one final question. And that is, and you may have touched on this, Mary Angela, and I didn't grasp it right away. I know you mentioned perhaps having some of the live discussions since some of the authors are right here close by. But what's your vision of the future for this great book club?
My vision, because I love connecting, is that my vision of the future is that each of the states create their own book discussion, and then we connect nationally together to share best practices, to talk about the books, and just that my vision of the future again is that people continue to read and engage and to talk about what they've been reading and to share their knowledge.
the Constance, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, once upon a time did an article about my wife, and they called her the great connector. She has this interesting ability to see connections that others don't see, and then to make them happen. And she just recently got by the way, the Andrus Award for community engagement from the AARP. So she sees these connections and makes them happen, which is kind of cool. Because if left to my own devices, I'd just be hanging around with my dog and playing the guitar. But so.
Outstanding. Thank you so very, very much. And I'm really glad I did ask that question, Mary Angela Baker, so that as this podcast is viewed, you have planted a seed for AARP volunteers in other states to do just that. I really appreciate it. And speaking about the staff and volunteers in other states, please share this Roost podcast with any of your friends that may not know about us. We like to get the word out. And I just want to thank you again, the two of you, for sharing. And Jack, I absolutely understand. I am glad that you, I don't know if Mary Angela invited you or you invited yourself, but you certainly are a perfect fit for this great endeavor that has turned out to be so successful. We
Well,
thank you
thank
again.
you, Constance.
Making the connection.
The connection. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. I'm going to lunch.
Yeah, it is that time. It is that time. Thank you. Bye
Thanks,
bye.
Constance. Bye bye.